Commander Jake Harrison stood on the bridge of Terra, Prime, and watched the massive alien station grow larger through the viewport. The structure was bigger than any city on Earth, with towers that twisted and curved in ways that hurt his eyes. To follow, after 3 months of traveling through space at speeds that should have been impossible, humanity was about to meet its galactic neighbors for the first time. The communications officer turned to Jake with wide eyes. "Sir, we're getting a transmission. They're speaking perfect English." "Welcome, humans of Earth," came a smooth voice through the speakers. "I am Ambassador Vextel of the Kethran Empire. We have been waiting for your arrival with great anticipation. Please dock at Base 7 and prepare for the most important day in your species' history." Jake felt his heart race. Everything they had dreamed of since the aliens first made contact 6 months ago was finally happening. The promise of advanced technology, interstellar trade, and protection under something called the Galactic Council seemed too good to be true. But here they were, representatives of humanity, about to join a community of species that had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. Dr. Lisa Carter joined Jake at the viewport. She was Earth's top expert on alien biology, though until recently that had been mostly theoretical work. "The station's design doesn't match anything in our databases," she said quietly. "The materials, the construction methods, even the way it moves through space. We're dealing with technology so advanced it might as well be magic." The docking process was smooth and automatic. Mechanical arms reached out from the station and guided Terra Prime into a bay that seemed to adjust its size to fit their ship perfectly. As the airlock sealed and atmosphere readings showed safe levels, Jake gathered his team for final preparations. Captain Ryan Blake was their military advisor, chosen more for his diplomatic skills than his combat experience. The aliens had made it clear that weapons would not be welcome during these initial meetings. Dr. Carter would handle the scientific exchanges, while communications specialist Sam Wright would record everything for transmission back to Earth. The airlock opened, and Jake got his first look at an alien being. Ambassador Vextal was tall and elegant, with scaled skin that shifted colors like oil on water. His movements were graceful, and his large eyes seemed to take in everything at once. Behind him stood 2 other creatures that Jake assumed were guards, though they carried no visible weapons. "Commander Harrison," Vextal said with what might have been a smile, "on behalf of the Triad Coalition and the Galactic Council, I welcome humanity to the greater community of intelligence. Your species has been observed and evaluated, and we are pleased to extend an invitation for junior membership in our organization." Jake had practiced this moment 100 times during the journey, but actually standing face to face with an alien ambassador made his prepared speech seem inadequate. "Thank you, Ambassador. Earth is honored by this opportunity and eager to learn from the wisdom of older civilizations." Vexto led them through corridors that seemed to glow with their own light. The walls were covered in symbols that shifted and changed as they passed, possibly some form of written language, or maybe just decoration. Other aliens moved through the corridors, and Jake was amazed by the variety of forms. Some were humanoid, like Vextal. Others looked like living crystals that chimed as they walked, and still others resembled insects the size of humans. "The Coalition is governed by 3 ancient species," Vextal explained as they walked. "My own people, the Kethrans, handle diplomatic relations between member worlds. The Zephyrians, who you see there with the crystalline forms, manage technology and resource distribution. The Morganti control military and security operations, though you will not meet them today, as they find new species somewhat disturbing." They entered a vast chamber with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. Representatives of dozens of species filled the space, all turning to look at the humans with curiosity. Jake felt like he was in a museum exhibit, but Vextal seemed to understand his discomfort. "Do not worry, Commander. Every species experiences this moment when they first see the scope of galactic civilization. You will find your place among us soon enough." The formal ceremony was impressive but brief. Jake signed documents that would bind Earth to the coalitions. laws and regulations in exchange for protection and access to advanced technology. The terms seem generous, requiring only that Earth accept guidance in developing interstellar capabilities and allow coalition advisors to help integrate alien technology safely. As the ceremony concluded, Dare Carter approached Jake with a concerned expression. "Did you notice how the other junior species behaved around the Triarch representatives?" she whispered. "They seemed afraid rather than respectful. And some of those species looked like they might have been quite advanced before joining the coalition." Jake glanced around the chamber and saw what she meant. The junior species, as Vextal had called them, did seem nervous around the Kethrans, Zephyrians, and especially when any Morganti were mentioned. But the opportunity before humanity was too important to let suspicions cloud their judgment. Captain Blake joined them as they prepared to return to Terra Prime. "The technology transfer begins immediately," he said excitedly. "Medical scanners, power generation systems, and manufacturing techniques that will revolutionize everything on Earth. This is the greatest day in human history." Jake nodded, but Lisa's observations nagged at him as they boarded their ship for the journey home. Still, the benefits were undeniable, and Earth desperately needed the advantages that coalition membership would provide. Whatever concerns he might have could be addressed later after humanity secured its place among the stars. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster watched the sunrise over New Geneva from the observation deck of the colony's main building. 3 years had passed since humanity first joined the Galactic Coalition, and the settlement on Kepler 442b had grown from a small outpost to a thriving community of 5,000 people. The alien technology had made it all possible, turning a barely habitable world into something approaching paradise. The medical scanners could diagnose any illness before symptoms appeared. The power cells provided unlimited clean energy. Manufacturing systems could create almost anything from basic raw materials. Life in the colony was comfortable and safe in ways that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. But Amy had begun to notice things that troubled her. Coalition's behavioral guidelines for member species were extensive and detailed. Junior species were expected to follow specific protocols for everything from trade negotiations to population growth. The guidelines were presented as helpful suggestions from older and wiser civilizations, but they carried the weight of law. Species that failed to comply found their access to technology and trade routes restricted. Thought Amy had read the guidelines carefully, and they seemed designed to keep junior species dependent and compliant rather than helping them grow stronger. Population limits, technological restrictions, and mandatory reporting requirements all work together to ensure that newer coalition members remain under the control of the 3 ruling species. The morning routine was interrupted by an alert from the colony's perimeter sensors. A ship was approaching, but it was not broadcasting the usual coalition identification codes. Amy made her way to the communications center where her staff was already tracking the vessel. "It's a Valdres merchant ship," reported Lieutenant Dan Cooper. "They're requesting emergency landing permission. Their message says they have refugees aboard." Amy frowned. The Valdres were one of the junior species, similar to humans in that they had only joined the coalition within the last century. Their homeworld was rich in rare minerals that the Zephyrians used in their advanced technology. She had met a few Valdres traders during supply runs, and they had always seemed nervous and reluctant to talk about conditions on their world. Grant them permission to land, Amy decided, but maintain security protocols until we know what we're dealing with. The Valdres ship was old and showed signs of hasty repairs. When the airlock opened, Amy counted 37 beings that looked like crosses between humans and large cats. Their fur was matted and dirty, and their eyes held the hollow look of people who had seen too much suffering. The ship's captain, a female named Keshra, approached Amy with obvious desperation. "Colonel Foster, we need help. Our world is being destroyed, and the Coalition will not listen to our appeals." Amy led Keshra to a private meeting room while her medical staff attended to the refugees. The story that emerged was worse than anything she had imagined. The Valdra's homeworld was being systematically strip-mined by Zephyrian operations. Entire cities had been relocated to make way for the mining equipment, and families were being separated as the population was redistributed to less desirable areas of the planet. We tried to protest through official channels, Keshra explained. But the coalition administrators told us that resource development was necessary for the greater good of galactic civilization. Those who protested too loudly simply disappeared. My mate was taken 3 months ago for attitude adjustment and has not been seen since. Amy felt her blood run cold. The coalition's public image was one of benevolent guidance and mutual cooperation, but what Keshra described sounded more like systematic oppression. What about the other junior species? Are they experiencing similar problems? Keshra's ears flattened against her head. All of them, Colonel. The Hectons are being used as forced labor in Morganti military projects. The Pilrani have had their entire industrial base dismantled and relocated to Zephyrian worlds. The Torvin are being subjected to medical experiments that the Coalition claims are for their benefit, but many of them do not survive the procedures. Implications were staggering. If Keshra was telling the truth, then the Coalition was not a benevolent alliance, but a parasitic empire that consumed junior species for their resources and labor. And humanity had walked right into the trap with eyes wide open. Amy immediately contacted Dr. Ben Rodriguez at the Coalition Technology Center on Earth. Ben had been instrumental in adapting alien technology for human use, but he had also expressed concerns about some aspects of the systems they had received. "Amy, I'm glad you called," Ben said when the encrypted communication connected. "I've been discovering some troubling things about the technology we've been given. Every device contains monitoring systems that transmit data back to Coalition space. They know everything about our medical records, our industrial capabilities, our population centers, even our private communications." Amy shared what she had learned from the Valdres refugees, and Ben's expression grew increasingly grim. "That matches what I've been finding in the data streams. The Coalition isn't just monitoring us, they're building a complete profile of human civilization. Production capabilities, resource locations, military strength, everything they would need to know to take control of our world." The secure communication continued for over an hour as they compared observations and shared concerns. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Coalition had perfected a system of conquest that avoided the messengers of military invasion. Instead, they offered advanced technology and protection to developing species, then gradually increased their control until the target civilization was completely dependent and helpless. Amy realized that she needed to contact Admiral Kate Sullivan, who had been serving as Earth's primary liaison with the Coalition military forces. Sullivan had mentioned concerns about some of the restrictions placed on human space travel and weapons development, but she had been told that such limits were normal for junior species. When Amy reached Sullivan later that day, the Admiral listened carefully to the report from New Geneva. "I've been having similar suspicions," Sullivan admitted. "When I tried to raise concerns with the Galactic Council, they dismissed me completely. They said that junior species often misunderstand the complexities of galactic governance and that Earth should focus on adapting to its new role rather than questioning established protocols." The conversation was interrupted by an urgent message from Keshra. 3 more Valdra ships had arrived at New Geneva, all carrying refugees fleeing their homeworld. The captain of the largest vessel, an elder named Vekmer, requested a private meeting with Amy. Vekmer's story filled in the missing pieces of the puzzle. The Coalition's method of operation was consistent across all the species they had encountered. First came the generous offer of membership and advanced technology. Then came the gradual introduction of regulations and restrictions, always justified as necessary for galactic stability. Finally came the systematic dismantling of the target civilization's independence and autonomy. "We have been studying this pattern for decades," Vekmer explained. "The Coalition has absorbed over 200 species in the past 3,000 years. None of them exist as independent civilizations anymore. They are all either extinct or completely integrated into coalition society as worker populations. Amy asked a question that had been haunting her since the refugees first arrived. How long do we have? Vecmer's expression was grave. Based on the timeline we have observed with other species, Earth has perhaps 15 years before the coalition begins the final phase of integration. By then, your people will be so dependent on their technology that resistance will be impossible. As the day ended and the twin moons of Kepler 442b rose over New Geneva, Amy stood once again on the observation deck. But now the alien technology that surrounded her felt less like a gift and more like a trap. Humanity had been chosen not for partnership, but for consumption, and the clock was already ticking toward their civilization's end. Dr. Ben Rodriguez stared at the data streams flowing across his screen and felt his hand shake slightly. After months of careful analysis, he had finally cracked the full encryption protocols that the coalition technology used to communicate with its home networks. What he found was far worse than anyone had imagined. Sam Wright, the former NSA cryptographer who had joined Ben's research team, looked up from his own terminal with a pale face. Ben, you need to see this section of the data. The coalition isn't just monitoring us. They're actively manipulating our entire civilization. Ben moved to Sam's workstation and read the decoded files. The coalition's operation was more sophisticated than simple conquest. They had spent 3,000 years perfecting a system that turned entire species into willing slaves. The process began with careful observation and contact, followed by the introduction of technology that created dependence. But the most insidious part was the gradual alteration of the target species. Psychology and society. The technology that humanity had welcomed so eagerly was designed to slowly change human behavior. The medical scanners didn't just diagnose illness, they introduced nanoscale compounds that affected brain chemistry. The food processing systems added substances that made people more compliant and less likely to question authority. Even the building materials contained elements that influence mood and decision-making. Look at this timeline, Sam said, pointing to a chart on his screen. 237 species have gone through this exact process. The Valdres are currently in Phase 4 of 7. The Hectons are in Phase 5. Humanity is still in Phase 2, but we're moving faster than most species because of our rapid adoption rate. Ben studied the phases of coalition integration. Phase 1 was first contact and initial technology transfer. Phase 2 involved increased dependence and the introduction of behavioral modification compounds. Phase 3 began direct political interference and the installation of coalition advisors in key government positions. Phase 4 saw the relocation of populations and the systematic destruction of cultural identity. Phase 5 involved the elimination of potential resistance leaders and the complete rewriting of educational systems. Phase 6 was the final absorption of all resources and the reduction of the species to a worker population. Phase 7 was extinction or complete genetic modification. The data showed that most species never made it past Phase 6. Those that survived were so altered that they could barely be considered the same people who had originally achieved spaceflight. The coalition had perfected genocide disguised as evolution. Ben immediately contacted President Helen Brooks through secure channels. Within hours, he and Sam were on a military transport to Washington, carrying encrypted drives containing the full scope of their discoveries. The emergency session that followed included the President, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and representatives from every major world government. The evidence was presented in a secure briefing room deep beneath the Pentagon. As the horrifying truth unfolded, Ben watched the faces of the world's most powerful leaders turn ashen. The coalition had played humanity perfectly, offering exactly what they needed most and making them grateful for their own enslavement. The compounds they've been introducing are already affecting our population, Ben explained. Compliance rates are up across all demographics. Critical thinking scores in schools have dropped 20% in the past 3 years. Depression and anxiety medications are less effective because the brain chemistry changes make people more accepting of negative situations. General Paul Anderson, the newest member of the Joint Chiefs, studied the timeline data carefully. According to this analysis, we have maybe 18 months before they begin Phase 3 operations. That means coalition advisors will start appearing in our governments, and we'll be expected to welcome them. President Brooks asked a question that everyone was thinking. Can we stop this process? Is there any way to break free from their control? Sam had been working on that exact problem. The good news is that we've identified the compounds and we can develop countermeasures. The bad news is that we're already dependent on their technology for critical infrastructure. Medical systems, power generation, transportation, communications. All of it relies on coalition technology. If we cut ties tomorrow, millions of people would die within weeks. The room fell silent as the scope of the trap became clear. Humanity was caught between slow death through absorption and fast death, through technological collapse. But Ben had been thinking about a third option. We don't have to choose between submission and destruction, he said. We can play their game while secretly preparing for independence. We need to reverse engineer their technology, develop our own versions, and find allies among the other species they're oppressing. Admiral Kate Sullivan had been coordinating with Amy Foster at New Geneva, and she shared the intelligence they had gathered from Valja's refugees. There are resistance movements on dozens of worlds. Most of them are small and poorly coordinated, but they exist. If we could unite them and provide technological support, we might have a chance. President Brooks authorized the most ambitious secret project in human history. Operation Phoenix would require the combined efforts of scientists, military personnel, and intelligence agencies across the globe. The official story would be that humanity was enthusiastically embracing coalition guidance and preparing for the next phase of integration. The reality would be a desperate race to achieve independence before the trap closed completely. Dr. Lisa Carter was brought in to lead the biological research team. Her job was to understand how the coalition compounds affected human physiology and develop ways to counteract them. What she discovered 2 weeks into the project changed everything. The compounds that are supposed to make us compliant are having the opposite effect on humans, she reported to the Phoenix leadership team. Our brain chemistry is different enough from other species that their control substances are actually enhancing our cognitive abilities. We're getting smarter, more creative, and more aggressive instead of more docile. Ben stared at the biological data in amazement. That explains why our integration timeline is accelerated. The coalition thinks we're becoming more compliant, but we're actually becoming more dangerous. They're going to realize their mistakes soon and adjust their approach. The implications were staggering. Humanity had been accidentally inoculated against the coalition's primary method of control. The very technology meant to enslave them was making them into more effective opponents. But it also meant they had even less time than originally calculated. Jake Harrison, now promoted to admiral and leading the military aspects of Operation Phoenix, coordinated with resistance cells that Amy Foster had contacted through her refugee network. The plan was audacious and desperate. While publicly cooperating with coalition requirements, humanity would secretly build an independent technological base and prepare for the day when they would have to fight for their freedom. The Phoenix facilities were hidden in remote locations around the world and throughout the solar system. Scientists worked around the clock to understand and replicate coalition technology without using any of their provided equipment. Military engineers designed weapons and defensive systems based on reverse-engineered alien principles. Intelligence. Officers established communication networks with resistance movements across dozens of worlds. As the months passed, humanity walked a tightrope between appearing compliant while building the tools of rebellion. Coalition observers noted the species' enthusiastic adoption of new technologies and increasing productivity, never suspecting that every advancement was being secretly copied and improved upon The race was on. Could humanity develop independence before the coalition realized what was happening? The answer would determine not just the fate of Earth, but the future of every species trapped in the coalition's web of control. And somewhere in the depths of space, coalition administrators were beginning to notice that human compliance levels were not rising as expected, leading them to consider accelerating the integration timeline. Captain Ryan Blake stood on the command deck of the Earth vessel, Freedom's Edge, and watched his crew prepare for another rescue mission. 2 years had passed since Operation Phoenix began, and the secret fleet of human ships had grown to over 50 vessels. Each one was officially registered as a coalition-approved trade vessel, but they were actually running the most dangerous missions in galactic history. The ships look identical to standard coalition designs from the outside, but their internal systems had been completely rebuilt using reverse-engineered technology. Human engineers had taken alien concepts and improved them, creating vessels that were faster, more maneuverable, and better armed than anything the coalition suspected humans could build. "Captain, we're receiving the signal from New Geneva," reported Lieutenant Tony Martinez from the communications station. "Colonel Foster confirms that the Hecton refugees are ready for pickup, but there's a problem. Coalition patrols have increased in that sector." Blake nodded grimly. Amy Foster had turned her colony into the hub of an interstellar underground railroad. But the operation was becoming more dangerous as more species joined the resistance network. The Hecton homeworld was in the final stages of coalition integration, and their government had been completely replaced by coalition administrators. The refugees they were evacuating represented the last free members of their species. The journey to the Hecton system took 3 days through hyperspace routes that didn't officially exist. Human scientists had discovered that the coalition deliberately hid certain navigation paths to limit the movement of junior species. By mapping these hidden routes, the rescue fleet could travel undetected through most of coalition space. When Freedom's Edge arrived at the rendezvous point, Blake found 12 Hecton ships waiting in the shadow of a dead moon. The Hectons were a bird-like species with brilliant feathers and keen intelligence. Their ships were beautiful works of art, but they were no match for coalition military vessels in combat. Captain Vorthak of the lead Hecton ship was the former commander of their planetary defense force. He had watched his world fall to coalition control and had spent months organizing the evacuation of civilians who refused to submit to the integration process. "Captain Blake, we have 15,000 refugees spread across our ships," Vorthak reported. "Men, women, and children who would rather die free than live as slaves. We also carry something else that might interest your resistance movement. Technical data on coalition military systems that we acquired before fleeing our homeworld." Blake's eyes widened. Intelligence on coalition military capabilities was exactly what the resistance needed most. "How did you manage to acquire that information?" Vorthak's feathers ruffled with what Blake had learned was equivalent to a grim smile. "Some of us worked in coalition facilities before we realized what was happening to our people. We copied everything we could before escaping. Ship designs, weapon specifications, command protocols, even the locations of major military bases. The data transfer took several hours, during which Blake's technical officers verified the authenticity of the information. What they found was both encouraging and terrifying. The coalition military was indeed powerful, but it was also bureaucratic and predictable. Their ships were designed for intimidation rather than actual combat, and their tactics hadn't evolved in centuries because they had faced no real opposition. More importantly, the data revealed the locations of coalition prison facilities where resistance leaders from dozens of worlds were being held. Amy Foster had been trying to locate these facilities for months, hoping to rescue captured allies and gather intelligence about coalition operations. As the refugee convoy prepared to depart for the safety of human space, Blake received an urgent transmission from Dr. Ben Rodriguez on Earth. "Ryan, we've made a breakthrough that changes everything. The coalition compounds aren't just affecting our brains in unexpected ways. They're actually improving our physical capabilities as well. Reaction times, strength, endurance, all of it is being enhanced instead of suppressed. The implications were staggering. The Coalition had been accidentally creating super soldiers instead of compliant servants. Human military personnel who had been exposed to the compounds were performing at levels that should have been impossible. Fighter pilots could handle G-forces that would kill normal humans. Ground troops could march for days without rest and maintain accuracy with weapons under conditions that would overwhelm other species. Blake shared this information with Vorthak, who listened with growing excitement. This explains something. We observed but couldn't understand, the Hecton captain said. Human traders and diplomats have been performing feats that seemed impossible. We thought it was natural human ability, but this suggests something far more significant. The convoy reached the outer solar system without incident, where the refugees were transferred to hidden facilities on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. The Phoenix Project had been preparing these sites for months, creating self-sufficient communities where freed slaves from across the galaxy could live and work toward the day when their homeworld might be liberated. Amy Foster met the refugee convoy at the Jupiter station and immediately began debriefing the new arrivals. Each group brought fresh intelligence about Coalition operations and insights into the resistance movements on their worlds. The network was growing rapidly, but so was the danger as Coalition administrators began to notice the disappearances. Meanwhile, on Earth, Dr. Lisa Carter made another disturbing discovery about the Coalition's long-term plans. The biological modifications being introduced to human populations were not random. They followed a specific pattern that she had seen in data from other integrated species. They're preparing us for something, she reported to the Phoenix leadership team. The modifications enhance certain capabilities while suppressing others. Physical strength and endurance are increased, but emotional empathy and creative thinking are supposed to be reduced. They're trying to turn us into perfect worker soldiers. The problem was that human biology was responding differently than expected. Instead of becoming emotionless drones, humans were becoming more capable in every area. The Coalition's own weapons were being turned against them, creating a species that was both physically superior and mentally resistant to control. General Anderson reviewed the latest intelligence reports from across Coalition space. Resistance movements on 47 worlds were now in contact with the human network. Weapons and supplies were being secretly distributed to freedom fighters throughout the galaxy. Most importantly, several species had successfully eliminated Coalition administrators from their worlds and were preparing for open rebellion. The timeline has accelerated, Anderson reported. Our sources indicate that the Coalition Council is meeting to discuss the human problem next month. They've noticed that our compliance levels are dropping instead of rising, and they're considering moving directly to Phase 4 integration. Phase 4 meant the arrival of Coalition military forces and the beginning of population relocations. It also meant that humanity's secret preparations would be put to the ultimate test. The Hidden Fleet, the reverse-engineered technology, and the growing alliance of resistance movements would either save the galaxy or be destroyed in the attempt. Admiral Jake Harrison coordinated the final preparations from a command center hidden beneath the Canadian Rockies. The facility had been carved out of solid rock and shielded against all known forms of detection. From here, he could communicate with human forces throughout the solar system and with resistance cells across the galaxy. The Coalition thinks they're dealing with a species that's becoming more compliant, Harrison told his senior staff. They have no idea that they've accidentally created their own worst nightmare. Every month that passes makes us stronger and more dangerous, but it also brings us closer to the moment when they realize their mistake. The moment of truth was approaching. Soon the Coalition would discover that their latest conquest had become their greatest threat, and the galaxy would learn whether 3,000 years of tyranny could finally be brought to an end by a species that refused to surrender its freedom. Ambassador Vextal stood on the command deck of his flagship as the Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Earth's solar system. 20 massive warships accompanied him, enough firepower to reduce a planet to ash if necessary. But this was supposed to be a peaceful mission, the final step in integrating humanity into the Coalition's embrace. The official reports indicated that human compliance had been declining over the past year, which was unusual, but not unprecedented. Some species required more direct guidance during the transition to Phase 4 integration. The presence of Coalition military advisors and the relocation of key population centers usually resolved any remaining resistance. Vextol didn't expect was the fleet of human ships that rose to meet them. Captain Ryan Blake led the human formation in Freedom's Edge, flanked by 30 other vessels that should not have existed according to Coalition records. The ships moved with precision and speed that seemed impossible for a junior species, and their energy signatures indicated technology that was far more advanced than anything humans should have possessed. "This is Admiral Jake Harrison of the Earth Defense Force," came a transmission that was broadcast on all Coalition frequencies. "Ambassador Vextol, you and your fleet are not welcome in this system. Turn around and leave immediately, or face the consequences." Vextol's scales rippled with confusion and anger. No junior species had ever dared to threaten a Coalition fleet. The humans were clearly suffering from some form of mass delusion brought on by their rapid technological development. A demonstration of Coalition power would quickly restore their proper perspective. "Human vessels, you will stand down immediately and prepare to be boarded," Vextol transmitted. "Your government has requested Coalition assistance in managing civil unrest, and we are here to provide the necessary guidance." The response came not in words but in action. The human ships suddenly accelerated to speeds that should have been impossible, their formations shifting and adapting with coordination that suggested a level of tactical sophistication that took most species centuries to develop. Energy weapons that glowed with unfamiliar colors lanced out from the human fleet, striking Coalition shields with devastating effectiveness. The battle was brief but decisive. Coalition warships, designed for intimidation and orbital bombardment rather than actual combat, found themselves outmaneuvered and outgunned by vessels that moved like living things. Human weapons punched through Coalition shields as if they were made of paper, and their targeting systems locked onto weak points that Coalition engineers thought were impossible to detect. Within 20 minutes, half of Vextel's fleet was either destroyed or disabled. The remaining ships attempted to retreat, but the humans had surrounded them with a precision that spoke of months of planning and preparation. Only Vextel's flagship remained functional, its crew stunned by the complete reversal of what should have been a routine integration operation. "This is impossible," Vextel whispered to his tactical officer. "Junior species don't have this level of technology or training. Our intelligence reports indicated that humans were becoming more compliant, not more dangerous." The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Lisa Carter, transmitting from Earth's surface, appeared on the Coalition communication screens with an expression of grim satisfaction. "Ambassador, your intelligence was completely wrong. The compounds you've been using to control us have been making us stronger instead of weaker. Every month that passed, every dose of your control agents, every piece of your monitoring technology has been turning us into something you never intended to create." Vextal's blood ran cold as the implications became clear. The Coalition's most effective weapon, the biological and psychological manipulation that had conquered hundreds of species, had backfired catastrophically with humans. Instead of creating compliant servants, they had accidentally forged a species of enhanced warriors who were immune to their primary method of control. But the real shock came when the battle was broadcast across the galaxy's communication networks. Amy Foster, coordinating from New Geneva, had ensured that every oppressed species would see the impossible sight of Coalition warships being defeated by a junior member. The carefully maintained myth of Coalition invincibility crumbled as world after world witnessed their supposed masters fleeing in defeat. The response was immediate and overwhelming. On 17 worlds, resistance movements that had been hiding in shadows suddenly emerged into the light. Species that had spent decades under coalition control rose up simultaneously, armed with weapons and supplies that had been secretly distributed by human agents over the past 2 years. The Valdres struck first, their remaining military forces, attacking the mining operations that had been destroying their homeworld. The Hectons sabotaged the forced labor camps where their people had been imprisoned. The Pilrani reclaimed their industrial facilities and turned their manufacturing capabilities toward producing weapons and ships for the rebellion. General Anderson coordinated the largest military operation in human history from his command center. Beneath Earth's surface, human ships appeared throughout coalition space, providing support and evacuation for resistance fighters while striking at administrative centers and communication hubs. The goal was not conquest but liberation, turning every freed world into a new ally in the growing rebellion. The coalition's response was swift but disorganized. For 3,000 years, they had maintained control through fear and dependence rather than actual military strength. Their forces were spread thin across hundreds of worlds, and their commanders had no experience dealing with coordinated resistance from multiple species. Dr. Ben Rodriguez made another crucial discovery during the early days of the war. The Coalition's automated systems, which managed everything from communications to resource distribution, were vulnerable to a specific type of cyber attack that human computer specialists had developed. By introducing carefully crafted viruses into coalition networks, they could disrupt operations across entire sectors of space. Their whole system is based on central control and automated responses, Ben reported to the Phoenix leadership team. They never developed robust security because they never faced a threat like this before. We can turn their own technology against them. The war escalated rapidly as more species joined the rebellion. Coalition administrators found themselves isolated and powerless as their communication networks failed, and their automated defenses turned against them. Species that had been enslaved for centuries suddenly remembered what freedom felt like, and they fought with the desperation of people who had nothing left to lose. Amy Foster established herself as the coordinator for refugee operations, helping to evacuate civilians from war zones while ensuring that captured coalition technology was distributed to resistance forces. Her colony at New Geneva had become the unofficial capital of the rebellion, where representatives from dozens of species worked together to plan the liberation of their worlds. Captain Blake led strike teams deep into coalition territory, hitting targets that were supposedly impregnable. The enhanced reflexes and endurance that coalition compounds had accidentally given to humans made them perfect for special operations. They could infiltrate facilities, gather intelligence, and escape before coalition forces knew what had happened. As the months passed, the war turned from scattered uprisings into a coordinated campaign that spanned the entire galaxy. The coalition's 3 ruling species, faced with the loss of their slave populations and the destruction of their administrative infrastructure, began to fragment as each group blamed the others for the disaster. The Kethrans retreated to their core worlds, abandoning their diplomatic outposts throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrians shut down their technology networks to prevent further sabotage, cutting off support to coalition forces throughout space. The Morganti launched desperate military strikes against rebel strongholds, but their forces were designed for suppressing unarmed civilians rather than fighting trained soldiers. Admiral Harrison realized that they were approaching a tipping point. The coalition was collapsing faster than anyone had expected, but that created new dangers. Isolated coalition forces might turn to genocide rather than surrender, and the sudden power vacuum could lead to chaos across hundreds of worlds. Final phase of the war would require not just military victory, but the establishment of a new galactic order that could prevent the rise of another tyrannical empire. Humanity had become the unlikely liberators of the galaxy, but they would need to prove that they could build something better than what they had destroyed. Admiral Jake Harrison walked through the corridors of the former Coalition command station that orbited the ruins of the Morganti military complex. 18 months of war had ended not with humanity's victory, but with the complete collapse of the 3,000-year-old Trier Coalition. The station's halls, once filled with the arrogant administrators of galactic tyranny, now echoed with the voices of liberated species working together to build something new. The final battle had taken place here, where the last coalition stronghold had fallen to a combined fleet of ships from 47 different worlds. The Morganti had fought with the desperation of a species that knew its reign was ending, but their weapons and tactics were no match for the coordinated assault of free peoples who had learned to work together. Captain Ryan Blake joined Harrison at the observation deck that looked out over the Liberation Fleet. Ships of every conceivable design floated in formation, from sleek human vessels to the artistic curves of Hecton cruisers to the crystalline structures that the Pilrani had built from reclaimed materials. It was the largest gathering of independent military forces in galactic history, and they had all come together for one purpose. The last coalition holdouts surrendered this morning, Blake reported. The Kethran enclaves have agreed to the peace terms. The remaining Zephyrian outposts have shut down their operations, and the Morganti military command has been dissolved. For the first time in 3 millennia, there are no coalition forces operating anywhere in the galaxy. Harrison nodded, but his expression remained serious. Winning the war had been the easy part compared to what came next. The sudden collapse of the coalition had left a power vacuum across hundreds of worlds, and the liberated species were looking to humanity for guidance in building a new galactic order. Lisa Carter approached them with a report from her medical teams. The aftermath of the war had revealed the full scope of coalition crimes against the galaxy's peoples. We've completed our analysis of the biological modifications that were imposed on the various species, she said. The damage is extensive, but not permanent. With proper treatment, most populations can recover their natural psychological profiles within a generation. The coalition's system of control had been even more insidious than originally suspected. Beyond the obvious oppression and exploitation, they have been systematically altering the brain chemistry of entire species to make them more compliant and less creative. Billions of sentient beings had lived their entire lives as shadows of what they could have been. Dr. Ben Rodriguez had been working with scientists from across the galaxy to develop treatments for coalition conditioning. The irony was not lost on anyone that humanity's accidental immunity to the control compounds had made them uniquely qualified to help other species recover their freedom of thought. Amy Foster arrived at the station aboard a transport filled with delegates from the new Galactic Republic, the democratic organization that had emerged from the ashes of the coalition. As the first human ambassador to the new government, she had spent months traveling between worlds to establish the principles and structures that would prevent another tyrannical empire from rising. The Constitutional Convention has reached agreement on the core principles, Amy reported to the assembled human leadership. Voluntary cooperation, shared technology development, and absolute respect for species autonomy. No single world or species will ever again have the power to dominate others. The new galactic government was deliberately designed to be the opposite of the coalition. Instead of centralized control, it operated as a loose confederation of independent worlds that chose to work together for mutual benefit. Instead of technology hoarding, it promoted open sharing of scientific advances. Instead of forced compliance, it celebrated diversity and encouraged each species to develop according to its own nature. President Helen Brooks had traveled from Earth to address the first Interspecies Congress, which was being held in the converted Coalition Command Center. Her speech was broadcast to over 300 worlds, marking the beginning of a new era in galactic history. We gather today not as conquerors and conquered, but as equals who have chosen to build a better future together, Brooks said to the assembled delegates. The coalition fell because it was built on fear and oppression. Our new republic will endure because it is founded on hope and cooperation. The transformation was already visible throughout the galaxy. Trade routes that had been controlled by coalition monopolies were now open to all species. Scientific research that had been restricted to the ruling classes was being shared freely. Worlds that had been strip mined for resources were being restored with technology developed cooperatively. by multiple species. Sam Wright had discovered something remarkable in the Coalition's historical archives. The Triad Coalition had not been the first parasitic empire to control the galaxy. The record spoke of at least 3 previous cycles where different species had risen to dominate others, only to eventually fall and be replaced by new tyrants. Pattern has been repeating for over 10,000 years, Sam reported. Each empire falls, there's a period of freedom, and then a new group gradually takes control using updated methods. The galaxy has never broken free of this cycle before, but this time was different. The galaxy now had a species that seemed naturally immune to the psychological manipulation that enabled such empires. Humans could detect and resist the subtle forms of mental conditioning that had allowed previous tyrants to gradually seize control. More importantly, they could teach other species to recognize and defend against such techniques. The human colonies throughout the galaxy had become centers of education and cultural exchange. New Geneva, Amy's original colony, now hosted universities, where beings from dozens of species studied together. The curriculum included not just science and technology, but courses on recognizing and resisting authoritarian control. Captain Blake had been promoted to admiral and given command of the Galactic Patrol, a voluntary peacekeeping force made up of ships and crews from all member worlds. Their mission was not conquest or control, but protection of the trade routes and assistance to worlds that requested help with local problems. The patrol fleets were deliberately mixed, with no single species controlling more than a small percentage of the total force. Command positions rotated regularly, and all major decisions required consensus from representatives of multiple worlds. The goal was to maintain peace without creating the concentrated power that could lead to a new empire. Dr. Carter had made another important discovery about human psychology that explained their unique role in galactic society. The same brain chemistry that made humans resistant to coalition conditioning also made them natural mediators and problem solvers. They could understand multiple perspectives simultaneously and find compromise solutions that other species might. Miss, we're not superior to other species, Carter explained to a gathering of xenobiologists. We're just different in ways that happen to be useful for this particular moment in galactic history. Our role isn't to rule, but to serve as a stabilizing influence while other species rediscover their own strengths. As the first year of the new Galactic Republic drew to a close, Harrison stood once again at the observation deck of the former Coalition station. But now the view was different. Instead of warships and weapons, the space around the station was filled with construction vessels building a permanent diplomatic complex. Trade ships from hundreds of worlds docked at expanding commercial facilities. Scientific expeditions departed for unexplored regions of the galaxy. Their crews made up of volunteers from dozens of species working together. The transformation was most visible in the children. On worlds throughout the galaxy, young beings who had been born under coalition rule were growing up free to explore their full potential. They played together in integrated schools, learned from teachers of multiple species, and dreamed of futures that their parents could never have imagined. The final scene that would remain in Harrison's memory forever took place in the gardens of New Geneva, where children from a dozen species ran and played together while their parents worked side by side in laboratories and workshops. Human children played alongside young Valgers, Hectons, and Pilrani, all of them growing up in a galaxy where cooperation was normal and oppression was just a story from the dark past. Earth had not become a galactic empire. Instead, it had become something far more valuable and lasting. Humanity had become the galaxy's immune system, the species that could recognize and eliminate the infections of tyranny before they could spread. They were the guardians who would ensure that the age of freedom continued, not through conquest, but through vigilance and the patient work of building something better than what had come before. The betrayal that was meant to enslave Earth had instead forged it into the superpower the galaxy needed to finally break free from cycles of oppression that had lasted for millennia. And in the laughter of children playing under alien suns, the promise of that freedom would continue for generations. To come,